All right, Alexander, let's talk about the assassination attempt on Slovakia Prime Minister Robert Fico. We're a couple of days removed from when this incident occurred. The reports are that he's going to make it through, but it, I would imagine he's not going to be the same. I mean, I've read a lot of analysis and reports saying that this is going to be a very difficult thing for him to overcome, this type of tragedy, a shooting to, from what I understand, to his abdomen, and turmoil in Slovakia as well. And the UK media, especially the UK media and the US media to a certain extent, were in a way rejoicing, I guess, it was saying that he deserved it to a certain extent. Of really, really disgusting, crazy comments and analysis coming from some collective West outlets. What do you make of this entire incident?
Well, I mean, if I can just talk about the British media briefly, I thought some of their coverage, a lot of their coverage, was disgraceful. Just to say, I mean, here's a man who's now still fighting for his life, which he is, by the way, subject of a murder attempt, and all that they can say is, repeat the stories that he's a populist, that he's a friend of Putin, that he's pro-Russian. He's none of those things, by the way. He's the leader of the Slovak left, but of course this is an old guard, social democratic type left, which the left in Britain and elsewhere no longer is. And that makes them hate him even more, even the left-wing people in Britain, the leaders there. And of course, he's not a friend of Putin or a friend of Russia. He's a Slovak patriot who wants the best for his country. I mean, I think that ought to be uncontroversial, and most Slovaks agree with him, which is why he's been Prime Minister of Slovakia for 11 out of the last 18 years and has done a good job by all accounts. Slovakia, the poorer part of the former Czechoslovakia, has been economically successful during the time that Fico has been running things, and why they've just re-elected him. So it's appalling commentaries. Now, I think the first thing to say, and I think this is something that the Russian politician and deputy chair of Russia's Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, has made. Here you have a situation where we haven't had political assassinations of leaders in Europe for a long time. And the first one who has been targeted for assassination in this way at this particular point of crisis is one of those leaders who has been speaking out strongly against Western policy on Ukraine. And that is not a coincidence. It is not chance. Now, I am not saying that this individual who carried out this murder was, or tried to carry out this murder, was part of a larger group, or that there was an organization or a hand behind him. I mean, so far, we haven't had evidence that says that, and the Slovak authorities themselves appear to believe that he was acting by himself. But as the Slovak authorities are also saying, you cannot separate this attack from this ferocious campaign of abuse against Fico and the line that he's been following, and which the parties which support him in Slovakia have been following from this murder attempt. The rhetoric against Fico, which of course continues. I mean, that's what the British media are doing. The rhetoric against Fico has made disturbed and angry people like this person see Fico as somebody that they can target, that there is some legitimacy, in going after him. And having myself had to, work in the past in the Royal Courts of Justice and meet angry and disturbed people like this, I have no difficulty seeing this. If you create an atmosphere of anger and hatred and abuse against someone, it becomes completely unsurprising that you'll find people like this would-be assassin who would decide to come after those people who are being smeared and attacked in that way, and who will resort to violence. The Slovak authorities are saying that is exactly what has happened, that in fact it seems within Slovakia itself, ever since he gained re-election, the campaign, the public campaign against Fico from the liberal opposition and the media in Slovakia, which is largely Atlanticist and liberal also, has been relentless and off the scale. And it has led us directly to this. This is, absolutely my view.
Yeah, but that's the point of the rhetoric and the demonization, isn't it? I'm going to be careful with my words. I'm not saying that the point is to get to an assassination of a world leader. That's not what I'm saying. But the point of the rhetoric and the demonization is to create such a hatred for someone that the political elite, the neoliberal neocon class doesn't want in power anymore. You want to create that hatred so that you can get to a point where that person can be voted out. That person can be regime changed out. That person can have a scandal created and then maneuvered out. For example, what happened in Austria with Kurtz, or I mean, the whole point of the constant, never-ending demonization. He or she is the next Stalin. He or she is the next mustache man. He or she is the next Pol Pot. All of this is meant to anger people to a point where you have the dynamics to get that person out of office, and then put someone who is going to come off of the Klaus Schwab assembly line of world leaders, that assembly line that Klaus Schwab, the WF kind of mints every couple of years. These clones that that come out of his school. I mean, that is the point, though. I mean, once again, I'm not saying that they want an assassination or they want a world leader to be killed, but they absolutely ramp up the rhetoric because they want Fico and every other Fico, whether it's Orban or Trump or Putin or Xi Jinping. They want that person gone.
That's exactly
Lawfare.
correct.
Maybe they create the hatred for the dynamics of lawfare, like what you see going on in the U.S. Yeah.
That's exactly right. I ought to add, you said, that they create scandals. They created scandals in the past about Fico. And one of the reasons he was voted out in previously, despite being a successful prime minister who, guided Slovakia economically in a successful way, was because a scandal, a corruption scandal and claims that he was involved in assassinations, believe it or not, was confected, at least not him directly, but people around him that he allowed this sort of situation to was confected around him. So Fico himself has previously been targeted with precisely this sort of thing. So yes, that is exactly what they want. They want to delegitimize political leaders who are political dissidents and drive them out. And of course, the other thing that these toxic campaigns, and by the way, just to say, there's a long article today in the Financial Times, of all places, which all but admits the fact that there was a hugely toxic atmosphere and campaign underway in Slovakia ever since Fico's re-election. But the other thing that they want to do is to intimidate and scare off anyone else who has also got doubts and wants to come forward and express them. And in that also, by the way, they are overwhelmingly successful. Very, very few people are prepared to, have the courage and the strength of personality that someone like Fico does, which makes them capable of coming forward and pushing back against all of this. By the way, there is a film of Fico speaking in April in which he basically warns that the rhetoric is becoming so bad, the atmosphere is becoming so bad in Slovakia that, an event might happen not unlike the one that has just taken place. In other words, a murder attempt against him. I mean, he actually warned about this, and we've seen exactly how it plays out.
Yeah, it's such a difficult situation, though. If you're a Robert Fico, if you're a Viktor Orban, um, Vladimir Putin, and you come into power on, let's say, a populist, whether left or right, but on a populist agenda. You're a patriot, and you want to look after your country, and you know that the globalist political class, once again, with neocons or neoliberals, you know they're going to come after you. You know they're going to come after you very hard. You know they're going to use everything in their power to try and remove you, including the endless amounts of money that they have, the control over media, the control over the institutions, the education institutions, the NGOs, like what we see going on in Georgia at the moment. And you understand that this is a very toxic atmosphere. So you're going to have to deal with these forces. And you're going to have to try and get some control over the media, try and get some control over the NGOs, try and get some control over the institutions, so that you don't have all this foreign meddling, and you don't have all this globalist influence trying to create this hatred in your country. But if you try and get a hold of all of this stuff, you're going to immediately be branded as an authoritarian dictator. I mean, you see Orban is struggling with this all the time. Putin, I would say, successfully navigated this, but it took him a long time. I mean, for the last 15, 20 years, many analysts have been talking about the fifth column in Russia and the sixth column in Russia, and all of these forces that have a hold of Medvedev or have a hold of Putin or have infiltrated the Kremlin. I mean, just in the past couple of years, Putin has seemed to be able to get a hold of all of this and to not really care what the New York Times calls him or what Blinken calls him or Biden calls him. I mean, he's moved past that. He's out of the system. But you see, it's such a difficult situation if you're a leader, especially in Europe, in Russia, Europe, the collective West. How do you overcome this?
Well, indeed, and I mean, I would add that in Russia as also, and this is a point which people overlook, he also had to contend with an awful lot of violence, including a violence in which a lot of people were assassinated. And now, of course, he's always blamed, in the case of Putin, he's always blamed for those assassinations. But if you actually analyze and look at them, many of the people who were assassinated were people who probably were more sympathetic to him than not. And I remember that if we're talking again about violence and assassinations, the same happened to Milosevic in Serbia. In the late 1990s and early 2000s. Again, there was a whole string of murders there, and again, it was always insinuated that Milosevic was behind them. But when you actually looked at who was being assassinated, nearly always they were people who were, on balance, sympathetic to him and who were in positions to support him. But no, it's very, very difficult indeed. And, there are things you can do. The foreign agents laws that we now see being introduced by various countries are, it's now clear, a key and very successful device. I mean, it was the fact that the Russians introduced a foreign agents law, which seems to have basically broken the NGOs that existed in Russia. I mean, up to that point, there'd been significant political force. After that, they basically cease to exist as a political force. Other countries in the former Soviet space have been doing the same. But Belarus has, Kyrgyzstan recently has done. Georgia, the government there is trying to do it. But of course, they're coming up against colossal opposition, protests in the streets all the time, threats of regime change. Always there's the worry that, people in the military or the security services will be suborned and brought over to the other side. So, it's very difficult. And of course, if you are
You have EU leaders showing up in Georgia, Alexander.
absolutely, exactly. And of course, if you are already a member of the EU, as Slovakia is, and if your currency is the euro, as in Slovakia's case, it also is, by the way, that is trebly, quadruply difficult. So, it's difficult. It is very difficult. Now, Serbia has struggled with this problem, but I think Vucic overall is on top of it. Orban has, I think, to a great extent, managed to contain it. But of course, the result is that he's the dictator, the populist, the Putinist, all of that. And there's a slow.
He's not on the euro.
He's not in the euro exactly, but there's also there's a slow movement now to try to basically push him out of the EU institutions, to isolate him and Hungary, and create a kind of cordon sanitaire around him, and perhaps ultimately push him out of the European Union completely if he continues along this course. So, it is very difficult. It's very, very difficult to see. And I have to say this murder attempt on Fico is going to make it more difficult. Because again, leaders are going to say to themselves, if I take this line, well, abuse is really bad. I can only take so much. I have to worry about my family, also remember. Um, endless investigations. I mean, the IFDR, for example, subjected to relentless investigations. If you look at them in Germany, for example, you have to worry about that too. That's also draining, and it's very difficult for your family also. But now, of course, you've also got to worry about your life. I mean, and a lot of people are going to say to themselves, I'm not prepared to take these risks, even if I'm personally prepared to put my life on the line. I've got my family, I've got my children, my wife, my spouse, husband. I've got these people to think about. I can't risk it. So it's a very heavy, very bad atmosphere. But of course, just to repeat, when this kind of thing happens, which it does, it's a sign not of a strong establishment, confident that it has the support of most of the people. It's the sign of a weak establishment that is becoming increasingly insecure and is having to do increasingly reckless things in order to maintain control.
Yeah, absolutely. But going back to the case of Russia and Putin, the only way to get out of this prison that all of these countries and many of these leaders are in is you have to get out of the system. You have to break out of the prison. You have to get out of the system.
Yes.
That's the only way.
Yes.
And that's very difficult. How do you get out of the EU? How do you get out of the IMF? How do you get out of the World Bank? How do you get out of all of these institutions, the NGOs, and the education institutions? How do you get out of all these things? Because at the end of the day, that's what controls your country, and that's what controls you.
Absolutely. Of course, in the case of Russia, the sheer size of the country, its enormous sophistication and complexity, and the sheer size of the institutions involved, ultimately played a major role in making it impossible to control them externally. I mean, you can operate NGOs in Moscow, but an NGO in Moscow might not have very much traction in a place like Krasnoyarsk. And, within the militaries and the security systems in Russia, because it's Russia and has been a great power in the past, there's that element of pride and self-confidence that ultimately enabled them to break through. But, in smaller countries, it's even more difficult, much more difficult. Even the Russians, even Putin, it took him a very, very long time to get through it all. Now, having said that, they did get through it all.
Can I just make a comment on that?
Yes.
Just a comment. Is that why? I mean, I imagine that's why the West, the U.S. Deep state, let's say, that's why they like to break up the countries into smaller bits, right?
Exactly. That's exactly right. I mean, divide and rule. That is exactly why they want to do that. But anyway, coming back to Russia, in the end, it proved impossible because they were up against a formidable political operator who was Vladimir Putin, a institutional system that was never fully under control, and a vast population which had, which was also which was difficult to control as well. The fact that Russia nonetheless did break away does mean that countries like Hungary, Serbia, even perhaps Slovakia, though to be clear, if Slovakia loses Fico, either because he dies, and that's still possible, or because he's so injured that he's no longer capable of resuming any significant role in politics, that it might, revert to its previous pro-EU Atlanticist position. That's not something to be discounted. I mean, that's a distinct possibility. But anyway, the very fact that there is Russia now does mean that other countries perhaps might start to feel, especially if Russia starts getting stronger, that they have alternatives and options. And I think you're seeing that play out a bit in Georgia, by the way. I don't mean that the Russians are behind the foreign agents law or anything like that in Georgia. But it is the case that the Georgian government doesn't feel quite as isolated and, facing just the EU as it once did. So, that probably over time, the fact, that Russian power is growing and that the Russians have broken away, that might encourage more people. But of course, it will also make the Western powers even more suspicious of any challenge and even more determined to nip it in the bud before it ever really starts getting strong.
Yeah, agreed. The Western powers are going to clamp down even more because they're more insecure, while at the same time, smaller countries are going to look at the rise of BRICS, the multipolar world, as well as the de-dollarization or the lessening of the dollar's strength to fund all of these things. We're in for a rough ride because it's
We're a very rough ride.
Tough.
We haven't
seen countries.
We're only at the start of this process.
Yeah. Okay. We will end it there. The Duran.locals.com. We are on Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Telegram, Rockfin, and Twitter X. And go to the Duran shop. Use the code GetReady15 to get 15% off merchandise. Link is in the description box down below. Take care.